Hi, and welcome back. Today we're going to continue our journey through the one big, beautiful bill. It's still, as many times as I said it, it still does not roll off my tongue very well. But today we're going to focus on the life stage called career and family growth. And this is one that still gets me. I'm still not sure how Teresa and I made it through this stage of life with our triplets plus one, especially as our triplets started high school this year. Mackenzie, our plus one, is in 8th grade, but we still had fun memories, and we still probably had horror stories to share with people raising this unique group of individuals. And that's, I think, the biggest key at this stage in life is that there's so many physical, mental, personal, financial priorities all pulling at parents. And it literally takes a village. Whether you have one child, 2 children, 4 children like us, multiples, twins, triplets, it doesn't matter. It is a full contact sport. As Teresa reminds me, or is often said to other parents, the early years were more physically exhausting. Now they're less physically exhausting, except for all the driving around we do, but there's more of a mental component as well. So with that said, let's dive into what the bill means to all of you going through this stage of life. So as I mentioned in the first phase of life, starting out, the standard deduction increases both for single filers and joint filers. So for a family, our standard deduction now is going to go up to $31,500. And this is going to be key as we talk through this, because before the Jobs and Tax Act of 2017, I think the number was around 70% of Americans file their tax returns using itemized deductions. And then that's dropped down to, I think, somewhere below 20. And just in my firm alone, the almost 70 tax returns that I've prepared last year, I would say probably close to 90% of them all took the standard deduction. Why? Because the original bill in 2017, and even this one too, has stripped out a lot of things that we used to be able to deduct for that we no longer can. And part of that's good, part of that's bad, but on the whole, we've actually seen people pay less taxes. Now, you may not think that, but the numbers kind of prove that out. And one of the reasons why is the tax brackets were lowered in 2017, and in this bill, they were kept the same, which actually is a huge win for everybody, because if not, we would have all seen our tax rates go up anywhere from 2 to potentially 3%. So those marginal tax rates stay the same. They've been made permanent now. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen and get into some of the details that can help you and your family. So one of the things that almost killed this entire bill was what's called this SALT deduction, which is state and local taxes. And it really centers around mortgage deductions and property taxes and how much you can deduct. So before 17, it was pretty much unlimited. Then they put a cap on it of like $10,000. So if you live in a high state tax like California, New York, those people were like up in arms because they did away with a huge deduction. Well, with this bill, they increased the deductibility cap from $10,000 to $40,000 for married filing joint, and from $5,000 to $20,000 for married filing single. But you'll notice that this deduction is only from 2025 through 2029. Then it reverts back in 2030 to what we've seen the past handful of years. And you'll notice this as we go along. And it doesn't matter what life stage that you're in, some of these deductions are only for a period of time. Some are made permanent. So how does this work? I will emphasize this time and time again throughout this life stage, is that your modified adjusted gross income is a huge driver of whether you're going to get some of these deductions or not. So for the SALT deduction, if your modified adjusted gross income is over $500,000 for married filing joint, or $250,000 if you're single, that deduction begins to phase out. So you can see an example that I'm showing here, and for those that are just listening, if your modified adjusted gross income $600,000 or more, you're going back to the minimal deduction allowed, which is $10,000. So let's just say your property tax and your state income tax is $50,000. You're only going to be able to deduct $10,000 of that. And that's significant because that pretty much decides whether you itemize or take the standard deduction. As I just mentioned, that standard deduction has climbed each year by roughly $1,500 to $2,000, and it's scheduled to keep doing that. The point I want to make is the fact is most people will continue to take the standard deduction even versus itemizing, even with this SALT potential increase. But again, this benefits most people that are, say, in that $300,000 to $500,000 modified adjusted gross income, that could help put you into a itemizing situation versus just taking the standard deduction. If this sounds complicated, it's because it is. They don't make this easy. And that's why working with professional, going through your options is always recommended. And as I pointed out, the floor is $10,000 for married filing joint and $5,000 for single. And this phase out cap, so this year it's $500,000, it increases by 1% each year. So it's not very much. The next one I want to tackle is child tax credit opportunities. The good news here is that the child tax credit increased from $2,000 to $200. But again, we have these phase outs that start. So like we just talked about with SALT, that phase out begins at $500,000 for a joint couple. With child tax credits, they start at $400,000 as far as being reduced by $50,000 for every $1,000 that you're over that $400,000. So again, and I know this, depending on your life stage and your career, if your modified adjusted gross income is $600,000 or more, you're fully phased out of this credit. So this is where, if you have the ability to manage your income, if you will, you can take advantage of some of these deductions. Again, this gets really complicated, and why working with an advisor, especially one like myself who's an enrolled agent that has tax planning specialty, can really help. Now, I'm not saying that's going to help everybody or it's going to save you a lot of money. There's just some situations where you cannot do anything. Child independent care credit. Again, this stayed the same, where if you have one child, you can deduct potentially up to $3,000 of expenses, $6,000 for two or more qualifying children. And qualifying children is age 12 to 13 and below. And so it's a percentage based on your tax bracket. So if you're in the lowest tax bracket, like 12%, then it starts at like 35%. And then it phases down to 20% as your income increases. So again, for a family at the top of the scale, $600,000, their credit is going to be 20% times $3,000 if they have one child, which is $600, or 20% times $6,000 if they have two or more. So their credit would be $1,200. So that's That's how that credit works. I think one opportunity that people should take advantage of with a twist in this life stage, because having young kids means a lot of sicknesses, a lot of going to the doctors, a lot of urgent care. Those expenses add up. So one of the best benefits is this dependent care FSA contribution. So it's actually increasing from $5,000 to $7,500, and there is no phase out for this. Now, the issue with FSA that I've always had is the management of it, meaning it's a use it or lose it. So let's just say you put $7,500 into your FSA. If you don't use it all by the end of the year, then you lose it. Now that's very different than an HSA, which is a healthcare savings account. Those I always highly recommend. Those did not get impacted with the one big beautiful bill, but it's something that I'm always talking, coaching, educating the families I work with on, that they should be contributing to an HSA and not using it. Because most people think, well, it's for healthcare. I'm going to put money in and then I've got this debit card. I just take it with me when I go to the doctor or whatever, and I just use it. That's what it's for, Paul, right? No. An HSA is the biggest or the best savings vehicle we have within the IRS code. And why is that? It's because it's something we call triple tax advantage. It's the only account that's like this. One, you put money in, you get a deduction for it. Two, you can invest the funds and they grow tax deferred. And third, when you go to take the money out for a qualifying medical expense, it's tax free. I like to see people use this more like a Roth IRA option where they're putting money into it and will be using it in retirement. So I know that kind of went outside of what I want to talk about with the one big beautiful bill, but again, hopefully you can see there's so many moving parts. There's some complications to all this and some in-depth planning that if you want to take advantage of some of these things that align with your overall wealth plan, it's very key to take care, make sure that you understand what you're doing to take advantage of some of these opportunities. So speaking of opportunities, the vehicle interest deduction, I talked about this in the first stage of starting out, but I thought it was worth mentioning in this stage of life too, because it does impact your federal tax bracket, does impact like how much you potentially have. So in this example, if Nick's in the 12% tax bracket, he pays $4,000 in qualifying loan interest, car loan interest. It's a $480 federal tax savings. Has no impact on state. Now here's where these caveats come in. It's got to be a new car assembled here in the U.S. It can't be a used car, and it can't be a car that's assembled in Germany that's then shipped over to the U.S. So I give two examples here that are, I think, self-explanatory, but those are the keys. And again, with most of these deductions, there's phase-out limits. If your adjusted gross income is over 100, notice we've talked about some deductions are 400, some are 100 like this one, some are 150, some are 140. It's all over the board. You remember when they did the Jobs and Tax Act, and they said that the administration was big on simplifying and making tax returns or tax prep easier. Well, in some ways they did that because they took away all these deductions, which basically forced people to just take the standard deduction. But now it's complicated things again because of all these different phase outs. And for some people, like I mentioned earlier, there's just nothing you can do. You're a W-2 employee. You get your salary paid to you every 2 weeks, every month, every week, whatever it may be, and there's nothing that you can do about it. Others can have more of a variable income. Say you're in sales. Maybe you can defer income, which has its pluses and minuses as well. Again, this is where trying to understand like what income you're going to have, what income bracket you're going to be having, that you can take advantage of or potentially take advantage of some of these deductions and some that you just can't. Now, I'm not going to talk about tips and overtime in this life stage because I don't think I think most people in this life stage that at least that I work with are in professional careers where they're making a salary and they're not getting tips or they're not getting overtime. But if you're interested in those, please see the first video that we did on starting out. I cover those in a lot of detail. Trump accounts. This is another one that has been in the news. But the interesting thing about Trump accounts are they don't take effect until 2026, and there's still a lot of loose ends, I would say, that need to be straightened out with these. So this is going to be a mouthful, which is why I needed some water. So what's a Trump account? Well, every child in the U.S. under 18 with a social security number is going to be given an investment account. So that's number one. 2, contribution limits. So I probably put these out of order, but if a child is born between 2025 and 2028, again, this is where we have like time limits on things. The federal government is going to give them an automatic $1,000 contribution. Now, say like with my kids, they're obviously all older than this. They can still have an account set up, and individuals, and I clarify this, while parents, relatives, basically anybody, can contribute up to $5,000 in total, in aggregate, using after-tax dollars. If you're a small business owner, the second bullet point should get your attention because employers, including government and nonprofits, can also contribute up to $2,500 per child. And that, I think right now, and this is where there's not exact clarification, we're thinking that counts towards the $5,000 aggregate total. So again, this is where it could get really complicated. But if you're a small business owner, you could basically contribute $2,500 to these accounts and get a tax deduction for it, basically. So what are these supposed to do? Well, they're encouraged to have people start saving young, whether it's parents or not, and they're kind of structured more like a IRA. And here's the withdrawal rules. So contributions, funds can only be drawn after age 18. And individual or like these non-employer contributions are not taxed on the withdrawal, but the earnings are taxed as regular income. So this is where it works like in a traditional IRA. You put money in, it grows tax deferred, you take the money out, that's when you pay the tax. So I'm still not necessarily sold on these. From a tax treatment, your contributions are after tax. They're not tax deductible, but like I just mentioned, they do grow tax deferred. So this would be an alternative to setting up a traditional or a Roth IRA for your kids. I am a big advocate of having your kids generate some kind of income that you can contribute to a Roth IRA. That, to me, we talk about this power of compounding and starting out. There's no greater gift that you can give your child than putting in $500,000, whatever it may be, a year into a Roth and seeing that thing just take off like, historically like a rocket ship and for their retirement. There's also some other caveats that they can use that money for that won't be penalized down the road, such as buying a first house. But I digress on that point. But I'm trying to give you an idea of how these Trump accounts can compare to either like a taxable brokerage account, a 529, or an IRA. From an investment standpoint, they haven't announced the menu of eligible mutual funds or ETFs, but I guess there's some kind of like strict requirements on diversification and fees. So there's more to come on this, but I wanted to put this information out there because especially for those that are going to be having babies, kids in the next few years, then you definitely want to take advantage of this because you want that $1,000 free federal contribution. That's the Trump accounts in a nutshell. So where does this leave us? Before I get to planning actions, let me stop sharing for a second. One of the things I've kind of pointed over and over throughout this life stage and this big, beautiful bill is the complications of it all. And that's one of the, I think, downsides to this stage of life is understanding what those phase outs are. Because if you're a married couple, dual income, you can get to some of these thresholds pretty darn quick, which means you're phasing out of the credit or just making too much money that you don't get the credit at all. So again, it's being able to potentially manage those or just set realistic expectations because people hear all these deductions in the media and I'm like, oh, I'm going to save all this money. I'm going to get this huge return. And then it doesn't end up happening because you make too much money. That's one thing, these phase out and these cliffs. And again, remember, some of these deductions are only for specific periods of time, like 2025 to 2028, or maybe up to 2030. It's all across the board. And then going back to that SALT tax, every state's going to be a little different. It's going to affect you in different ways. Again, if you're in a high state or a high tax state like California, New York, the SALT benefit or SALT deduction is probably going to benefit you a little bit more. For those that aren't, it may not even move the needle again to be able to have you itemize taxes, your tax return versus just taking the standard deduction because it's increased. So I think my biggest frustration, with this life stage and the big, beautiful bill is the complexity that it adds. So with that said, let me go back to sharing my screen and let's get into what you can do from a planning standpoint. So first and foremost is maximize those dependent care benefits, especially the FSA. But again, you have to manage that. I don't want to see families putting in the max amount only to see it not getting used by the end of the year. So check with your employer on that. Make sure that you're eligible. And again, I would strongly advise you to check into HSAs. Again, it wasn't a part of the big, beautiful bill, but I think it's definitely something from a planning standpoint you should take a look at. The second is find harmony within your savings plan. I describe this one as Mike Tyson has this famous quote, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face." My version of that is Teresa and I had a plan until we found out we were having triplets. We were literally on our way to the car dealership to trade in her little Saab sedan for a smaller SUV. And that was the day, it was the first ultrasound I got to go to that we found out that we were having triplets. And so I called the dealership and I said, we're not coming in. I need a bigger car. Probably a minivan. And that's what we ended up doing. So things are going to come up. Life happens. You may think that I'm going to set aside this amount every month, and having that automatically, like savings automatically deducted from your checking or savings account is by far the best way. Automation is your best friend when it comes to savings. But things are going to happen, and maybe you can't do it 1 month. It's okay. Life happens. but trying to find that harmony. The other piece of this too, specifically from a tax standpoint, because I get this question all the time, is from a retirement standpoint, should I be doing Roth or traditional contributions, whether it's in an IRA or a 401k? And I'm a proponent of saying if you're in lower tax brackets, then at a younger age, then Roth is your best friend. You would likely never be in a lower tax bracket than you are today. Everybody's different, of course, but that's one thing I point out. And again, it kind of evolves into this complexity of tax planning, retirement planning, college planning all together. And that's really where that makes TAMMA unique in this boutique family office firm that I've built in helping families walk through and be a guide through all these moving pieces. As I mentioned earlier, state-specific tax planning, this whole SALT thing, a deduction, whether you're going to be able to do that or not. And then speaking, I have a point in here about college planning, but most states offer state tax deductions for qualified 529 plans for their states. So I'll come back to that in a second. As I mentioned, if you have the ability to manage your tax brackets carefully, meaning knowing like how much more income you would need to get into the next tax bracket, to go from, say, 22 to 24 or 30 to 2, and knowing just, it's important to know those brackets, but just importantly, knowing what those phase out amounts are for these various deductions that we've talked about. As I mentioned, vacation planning, God, I know it's hard. I know it's hard trying to juggle all these financial priorities that I just talked about and getting punched in the face and having surprise triplets. But again, the younger that you can save for your kids' college planning, college education, and I'm not talking a lot. I'm talking putting $25, $50 in. And I think emotionally what that does for people is that at the end of the day, they probably know I'm not putting in $50 a month into a 529 plan isn't going to cover the cost of college for one of my kids. But the ability to know that you're doing something far exceeds whatever that amount may be. Knowing that you're doing something that you want to do for your kids and help them get started, especially with what we're seeing today, is one of the greatest gifts that you can give. And it doesn't require that much. So just keep that in mind when I think that's sometimes the enemy of perfection is just the inability to not get started because, well, it's only a little amount. It's not going to amount to much. It does. It adds up. And then the last thing I want to touch on with this life stage is the universal charitable deduction. So again, if you were taking the standard deduction and you were charitably inclined, those charitable deductions might not have resulted in a deduction for you. But now, even if you take the standard deduction, there's a charitable deduction that you can get $1,500 for singles and I think $2,500 for married filing jointly that you can still take while taking the standard deduction. So for those of you charitably inclined, that's something to be mindful of as well. So there was a lot to cover in this life stage. Why? Because as I mentioned probably multiple times, there is so much pulling at you, whether it's the kids, the career, financial, family, trying to maintain yourself, your own health, friendships. It's tough. These life stages of growing your career and your family, and this next stage that I'm going to talk about, building the building years, it can be hard. But with the right partner, with the right guide, you can build a roadmap that helps you get to where you want to go. And that's what we do at TAMMA. So with that being said, again, you have any questions, you can follow us on our YouTube channel, active on LinkedIn, our website, tammacapital.com. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks.